Dans le monde anglophone, un ensemble de plus en plus audible d'universitaires et de commentateurs s'inquiète de menaces internes au campus sur la liberté d'expression et la liberté académique. Plusieurs interviews précédentes sur notre podcast mentionnaient ce problème, au moins en toile de fond. Des étudiants et des professeurs ont été réduits au silence, parfois officiellement et parfois de facto, par des collègues, des manifestants, des administrateurs, etc. En Turquie, le problème est bien pire encore. C'est le gouvernement et les institutions dépendantes de l'État qui limitent drastiquement l'expression des professeurs d'université. Pour cette interview, j'ai été mis en contact avec un grand nombre de personnes, pour la plupart des universitaires turcs en exil. Un professeur étranger dans une université turque a dû décliner mon invitation, pensant qu'une interview pourrait le mettre en danger. Mon invité, in fine, était Aslı Telli Aydemir, qui est maintenant chercheuse à l'université de Siegen en Allemagne. In the English-speaking world, an increasingly vocal minority of scholars and commentators have voiced their concerns about campus threats to freedom of speech and academic freedom. Many of our previous interviews featured this concern, if only in the background. Students and professors have been silenced, both officially and de facto, by colleagues, protesters, administrators, and so on. In Turkey, the problem is much more daunting. It is the government and state-run institutions that have cracked down on the expression of college professors. For this interview, I was put in contact with many different people, most of them Turkish scholars in exile. A foreign professor at a Turkish university felt unable to participate, fearing for his safety. My guest in the end was Aslı Telli Aydemir, now a research fellow at the University of Siegen in Germany. Hi everyone, I will be talking today to Professor Aslı Telli Aydemir. And Professor Aydemir, you studied several disciplines in the social sciences and the humanities, including political science, social anthropology, and communication. You worked as full-time faculty in the College of Communication and Cultural Studies MA program at Istanbul Sehir University from 2010 to 2016, and you are now a research fellow at the University of Siegen in Germany. Maybe you can explain why.
Thank you for the clear and precise introduction. It was exactly as I would have done for myself, at least for the last several years in terms of my career. Yes, I've been studying abroad, but so Eylem and I were both signatories of the peace petition for Kurdish freedom. For Kurdish lands. So this was a petition we signed back in January 2016, and it was announced in January 2016. And afterwards, there was this big surge and labeling on us as academics. We were among the around 1,000 signatories of the petition in the first track, and then the signatories increased to around 2,000 in number. But the first track signatories, including us, were actually black labeled, starting from the first instance by the government, by the Turkish government, as well as the Higher Education Council. And also the rectors and the academic boards of the universities that actually just obeyed all the principles that were to follow with it. And so Eylem was dismissed, and I just was sacked because I was working at a private university, and Eylem worked at a public university. So this is sort of, as far as the regulations go, you can be dismissed from one and you can be sacked from the other. So that's why we actually applied for the same fellowship, for the Philip Schwartz Initiative Fellowship. That is funded by the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation Umbrella Network. And we ended up both here in Germany.
Okay. What was the situation before academics signed this petition?
Well, the situation before was that there would be actually some kind of reform in terms of, or an agreement in terms of the Kurdish lands of the country, and the AKP government was actually shooting for, let's say, freedom in those lands, and some rights actually offered to the citizens living in those lands for a certain period, but then this got diluted, and it was a war situation basically in those lands, and there were civil deaths as well in those lands, and that's why we decided to sort of give a trigger warning and sort of just do a public dissemination of what was happening. And we called this a crime because it was actually a crime committed by the government. And that's why we signed this petition saying we don't want to be part of this crime.
Okay. And what was the situation for academics before?
Well, the academic?
In the years before this event?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I guess, just quasi democratic situation. It was we had problems with the Higher Education Council. We also had sort of auto censorship, as well as some sort of let's say lack of rights situation in academia, and a lot of debate surrounding it. But it wasn't this much of a tough surge happening. Mm-hmm. But it was corporatist, let's say. It had an impact of the neoliberal politics and economy since Turkey became a fast developing country within the last several years. So it was a neo-corporatist, let's say, university setting. But right after the petition, it just became drastic and just was underlined with the surge and with the dismissals.
Okay, so the central event is really this petition. Okay, so in the wake of these events, it seems that many Turkish academics just left the country. Many of them apparently went to Germany. Did any stay in Turkey?
Yes, of course. There are some who still haven't been dismissed or who haven't lost their jobs. That is not a very big number when you compare it to the first track of signatories, which is around 1,000 people, and some were already abroad when they were signing it. So if you think about, let's say, 800, 900 academics being within the borders of Turkey, during and after signing the petition, well, around, let's say, 1/3 to half of the people just got out of the country, and the rest are still there. Some with their jobs, some still without their jobs. Some have passport confiscations, and they have been dismissed with a decree law of the state of emergency. And that's why their passports have also been confiscated, and they have mobility restrictions by the government. And even though they like to go out of the country, they cannot. And some have gone out of the country and have had their passport confiscation announced, but at least are out of the country. Some are out without restrictions, so there are different alternatives to what's happening.
Okay. Maybe we can explore or explain why so many of you have, I don't know if it's a decision or a sort of necessity, but why so many of you have joined Germany.
Well, we could call it a necessity more than a preference, because I mean, like I told you, we have lost our jobs, and for some of us who've lost their jobs, it has also been, let's say, identical to civil deaths, since they would not be able to find any academic or other, let's say, institutional, public, state institutional jobs and continue their careers. What they could do would be just maybe working in companies or setting their own business. But then again, with the last, let's say, call of the economic crisis in Turkey and the political situation, of course, this would also be another threat. And most of us have families, we have kids, and so it would be really hard to earn our bread. And so it's been out of necessity that we're out of the country. And those that stayed, I mean, there are some people who have just preferred to stay. Among those, even who have lost their jobs, have somehow preferred to stay because they wanted to set up solidarity academies. They wanted to form cooperatives and somehow continue, let's say, higher education according to their own beliefs and principles in their, let's say, own communities and with their former students, which is something really respectable. It's something we really respect and appreciate, and we also try to support by all means, even though we're outside the country right now.
Okay. So I was wondering, in practice, so to say, how does the curtailing of academic freedom happen, on very concretely for people who have signed the petition? What happened? How were they, removed from their jobs? How did they, or if they were not, how did they come to understand that they were not, really welcome, so to say, anymore?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's the decision of the government to have us removed from our positions, and most of the universities, rectors, and academic boards just complied with it. They didn't really reject this decision, except for a few ones. Who have had their own conscience and own belief in academic terms and their own means have actually stood against this. And there have also been rectors who have stood against this, who have also been removed of their jobs. So, I mean, it's just a rigorous process that has happened in the country. And now, like I said, a few private and a few public universities have stayed along with their, let's say, with their academics who have been peace signatories. They still go on with them, but most of these people have also been opened court cases, penal court cases against, and so they seemingly continue their academic positions and careers and can continue teaching and researching in the country. But then again, they have their penal courts at the back of their heads that they always have to think about, and they're in a threatening situation. And this fear culture has been created ever since the petition was announced back in the beginning of 2016.
Okay. So also private universities, even though they are not, I guess, state-run, they complied with, I don't know, government commandments. I don't know how to say.
Yeah, I mean, there's some sort of hybrid situation in Turkey. It's really idiosyncratic hybrid situation where there is the Higher Education Council that's linked to the Prime Minister, and Prime Minister is actually controlled by the government and the president himself. So these private institutions are also somehow, let's say, ruled by or dependent upon the Higher Education Council. So it's so worked out that after signing the petition, even though I was working in a private university, I also had to go through disciplinary investigations and had to go to the police and declare. So I'm also one of those who have been sued at the penal court. So it just, they just found sort of this let's say, opening in the regulations in terms of the hybrid redundancies, and they just worked it onto themselves to just have it work for the surge upon academia.
Uh-huh. So I'm curious about who exactly filed this lawsuit against you. Is it the Council for Higher Education?
Well, it's when it's penal law, it's actually the Ministry of Justice that's behind it. But I mean, there are many actors involved in this. So the attorney is sort of they are actually just given their authority from the higher court of justice. And so, I mean, we're just being blamed for being criminals of terror, inciting terror in the country, just because of signing this petition and publicly declaring it. So, I mean, there are many actors involved in this, and it's basically the government.
Sure. Okay. Can you explain to me? Well, no, maybe I will ask this question just after that. But first, I wanted to ask you, there is this very famous case of a Turkish journalist. She shares your first name and she shares the last name of the president. Or I don't know if he's prime minister now. It's Asli Erdogan.
Oh, yes, the author.
And, yeah. So I was wondering because I think she was sent to jail. So I was wondering if she fell prey to the same type of law that you did, or is it something different?
Well, it was a similar case, but there are a few, let's say, few more idiosyncrasies with why she was charged and sent to prison and had to stay in prison for the time being. It is that she was editor of a pro-Kurdish journal. Not a journal, but a newspaper, I should say, called Özgür Gündem. And so her case is a little bit different in the sense that, I mean, she's namedly this famous author, but at the same time, she is politically inclined. And so she was editing a pro-Kurdish paper, and so I guess her crime doubled in that sense in the sort of neo-corporate authoritarian regime of Turkey, and so she was one of those who had to be the scapegoats and sent to prison for some time at the time.
I see. Okay, so now to get back to you, we can discuss your exile, so to say, to Germany. So first of all, I wanted to ask what you were risking exactly. So there was a lawsuit against you in Turkey. So what could have happened to you had you stayed behind?
Well, I mean, you never know what happens in the country. You wake up one morning and there's a lawsuit against you. You wake up the other morning, you have travel restrictions. And then you're also not only, let's say, risking your job or losing your job, but at the same time dismissed and not being able to work anywhere and black labeled by some, let's say, pro-nationalist group. This could also happen, and it did happen to quite a good number of my colleagues while they were still working at the universities. You know the Scarlet Letter situation. It's a famous novel. They come and they actually just put these curses on your doors, on your office doors in the universities, and your life is threatened. So you never know what happens. And when you have family and kids, and when the situation is getting really worse, so worse that you don't really want your kids affected by the educational system and the, let's say, failing of all liberties, all human rights and liberties in the country, then you want to create a safe zone for yourself.
And so how did you get to reach Germany?
Well, my passport wasn't confiscated, so my family was also, let's say, able to just follow the norms and go to the consulate and ask for the visa after I received the fellowship from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. So they did our family reunification immediately while we were still in Istanbul, within a week or two, and then we just got our ticket and came to Germany.
Great. Okay. And so you found a position at the University of Siegen. Can you briefly describe what's your work there?
I'm research fellow here, so I don't teach now, except for, let's say, more flexible seminars that I do during summertime or during the fall season. There's also, let's say, a few talks that I give, or let's say, separate classes that I give. Other than that, I have a personal project that I carry out, and I also try to spend time in the network of Academics for Peace, because there is a whole lot of colleagues who are in Germany and in other parts of Europe right now, and so our network continues here, both digitally and physically. So we have also become an association here in Germany, Academics for Peace Germany Association. And so I spend my time working together with colleagues on collaborative projects as well, other than my personal project.
Okay. So I heard this network of Academy in Exile, which is an initiative supporting scholars at risk from Turkey to reestablish their career in Germany. I'm guessing you know about them.
Yes, Academy in Exile is actually also another, let's say, network, sort of an umbrella network of a few institutions who are providing funding and assistance to endangered academics. Yes, but the way I'm here, the way I received the fellowship is through, like I told you before in the podcast, the Philip Schwartz initiative linked to the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. So that is something.
Yes. Okay. What can you describe this initiative, maybe?
Academy in Exile?
No, I meant Philip Schwartz.
Philip Schwartz is the name that could be familiar to our listeners, maybe. So after the Second World War, well, before the Second World War situation, actually, when the Jews were threatened, the academics and researchers among them were also threatened in Germany. And so Philip Schwartz was working in the medical field, and he just got into contact with a few colleagues in Turkey and spent his exile time in Turkey. He was well received in Istanbul, and so this initiative now, as sort of a memory and let's say an ode to also let's say his stay in Istanbul and to the colleagues that helped him out, was actually set up in Germany, and it's a very new initiative. It was set up in 2016, even though Alexander von Humboldt Foundation is quite well-known and established institution. So it was under the auspices of this foundation, and universities in Germany got interested, and the Scholars at Risk Germany section was established here. And so this Philip Schwartz initiative, let's say, under the auspices of Alexander von Humboldt Foundation and Scholars at Risk Germany label, started, let's say, providing assistance and funding to at-risk scholars around the world, not only Turkey, but also the Middle East and South Asia for the time being. And it really depends where the risk sort of climbs, and they might also be interested in other regions of the world.
Sure. Okay, well, that sounds great. Yeah, I want to ask you about the long-term prospects for Turkish academics. Maybe we can start, since we were talking about your own case and more broadly the case of those who left the country. Yeah, I wanted to ask you, what are the long-term prospects for yourself and your colleagues who also went to Germany, for many of them, to other countries for others? Yeah.
That is tricky because our fellowship is 2 years through Philip Schwartz, and there are also other colleagues who just came with 6-month fellowships, some with a year-long fellowship. Some just came without anything because, I mean, they just got the news that they would be dismissed, or they got dismissed and just really tried flitting out of the country. And they could somehow succeed within short instance. So there are also colleagues who just fled out of the country without any funding or scholarships or any sort of assistance whatsoever, and had to find their way out after sort of settling here. And some have even had to apply for exile. So have the refugee status first, and then go on and continue with their lives. So there are, let's say, different levels and degrees of the risk that is still being lived, even though we are now out of the country, out of the homeland. So it really depends what you want to do, I guess, with your life as well as your career. Because we definitely have no clear prospects. And there are very few who could find tenure track positions or permanent positions. And other than that, we just, I guess, have to continue applying to different research positions. And there is also the challenge of a foreign language. If you don't speak German, for instance, and you're in Germany, like myself, I didn't speak German before coming here. And even if I spoke other languages that were valid in Europe, this was not really helping out too much because you're required to speak the language of the country you live in. So at the same time, there's the challenge of learning a new language. And after a certain age, it's really becoming difficult for us. So without sort of just accomplishing a certain level of the language, you can't really find a permanent or sort of permanent job. So you always have to be precarious.
It's more important in the social sciences probably than in the natural sciences, where most of the research is carried out really in English. I guess in the social sciences there is usually a more of a weight of the local language and sort of traditions of scholarship in the literature. As far as I understand.
Yeah.
Myself, I'm in Germany. My German is it's fine, but it's really not great. But still, I can do research because it's all in English, and I'm in physics.
Yeah, still you have some requirements. I mean, they urge you to come up with a certain, let's say, certificate of a degree of German, like B2 or C1 or what have you. Otherwise, you would always be sort of unshortlisted for any of the jobs that has a longer prospect.
Yeah. Okay. And for people who, well, not necessarily people who signed the petition, but just academics in Turkey in general. Well, this is a very tough question. I'm almost asking you to, look into a crystal ball here, but can you say anything about long-term prospects of academic freedom in Turkey?
Well, I mean, I don't see much hope in that. because of the last elections and the presidential system starting to rule in the country. Because it's just going to be the same old situation where there is, let's say, lack of liberties and human rights in any country so far in basic history. You would see that it's the mercantilism of the government ruling that takes place. And even if it's not sort of, let's say, there are people in all the universities around the country, there might be some other, let's say, dissidents, of course, figures in academia as well, but those dissident figures will definitely not be in the leading situations or the academic boards who would have the authority to make the actual decisions about academic freedom or liberties. So I actually do not really have any hope in terms of the institutional academic freedom, but I have a lot of hope for what's happening outside the classical and the mainstream academia.
Okay. So I have reached actually the end of my questions, but I'm very aware that I know very little about the topic. So I'm sure I've missed some important angles. So yeah, would you like to maybe add something?
Yeah, I mean, I would just maybe make an urgent call for support and for concern to Solidarity Academies that's been so far composed in the country as well as outside the country by the colleagues in the Academics for Peace Network and by those colleagues that actually have supported us with their insight and concern for academic freedom. So you can just, I guess, Google us by writing Academics for Peace in your search panes, and you would see that we have a website, we have a blog, we also have a lot of, let's say, opportunities, have posted a lot of opportunities for people to sign in and collaborate with us, or maybe do a bit of donations if they don't really have the time and energy to do other stuff or other cooperative work. So I guess we're just not alone in this, and like I said, there is still hope in solidarity and collaboration towards academic freedoms in the world.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Aydemir, for answering all my questions.
And thank you for taking the time to be interested and concerned about this. We appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's what we try to do on the podcast. I mean, it's the first time we address problems with academia outside of the Western world, so to say. I mean, depending on where you see Turkey, but but I really wanted to do this. It was difficult. I contacted several different people, including Professor Lucas Thompson. I'm sure you will be familiar with him, but he told me he couldn't come talk to us because he's still in Turkey, so he would not feel very safe doing that.
Yeah, I would really imagine that it would be the case. I mean, I just, for instance, when I got your contact, I was hesitant to tell my colleagues in Turkey, except for one, Aslı Telli. She's really active, even though she's still in the country, and also one of the, let's say, leaders of the digital network as well, all the Google groups and everything. And so I know that she's really outspoken in a lot of the events in terms of academic freedom. So I would just know that it wouldn't be a problem for her. But for other friends, I would just be hesitant in proposing to them.
Okay, well, I think we managed in the end to get something interesting. It's a bit of a shame that that we couldn't have anyone else. Then maybe in a few months I can try and reach again to well, the people in this mailing list, so to say, and then see what happens.
Yeah, because I mean, two of the people, one is actually a research fellow in Academy in Exile, which we were interested in, and the other is coordinator of Academy in Exile. So it would be interesting to speak with them as well.
Yeah, I was also given the name of, well, I was also advised to contact this network. I can't remember. The name was Kocaeli or Kocaeli?
Oh,
This
yeah,
network
Kocaeli
of
Solidarity.
researchers.
Yeah, actually, it's Ruhi Demiray, who's a research fellow here in Siegen. Actually forwarded your contact to me. He's one of the Solidarity academics in Kocaeli network, but right now he's in Siegen, so he can't really work actively with them. But like today, there was the trial case of Onur Hamzoğlu. I don't know if you pursued that case at all, but he's been staying in prison for 5 months. Since he's also politically inclined for the Kurdish front. So he's co-spokesperson of Democratic Congress of the Peoples, which is, let's say, the grassroots organization of HDP, the pro-Kurdish party in Turkey. He's been ignited with a lot of crimes, and so he had to spend 5 months in prison. Without any defense whatsoever. So today was his court case, and he's finally released. There is still a verdict against him, but he's finally out in the open. So he's not really spending time in prison anymore. So that was great news. And he's also part of Kocaeli Solidarity Network. And so the whole network would be there hearing the court case today in Ankara. But other than that, I don't know. I mean, those people might have been interested in speaking with you, lest they're still in the country, so they might also find it sort of risky.
Of course, I understand. Well then, I will keep an eye on this. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And till next time.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.